It's in memory of Pola Levina. Then we will hear a little bit about the initiative, and then we will have 4 speakers, and I will only introduce the speakers then each at a time very briefly, because we don't have much time. All of those who registered for this webinar saw on the registration webpage more information about the speakers. So please feel free to go back to that then if you want more information. We're very lucky to have 4 very distinguished speakers here tonight, or wherever you are this morning. It will be unfortunately too brief to do, I think, justice to really the memory of Pola Levina, and also to discuss the topics that were very important to Pola Levina, that is learning about the Holocaust, teaching about the Holocaust. But we will do our best to do at least a first introduction to that and to get different perspectives. So what I will now do, I will play this short little video, and we will hear after that then from Elena. 1 second.
Dr. Pola Levina was among the most eminent historians of the Holocaust. Not content with academic achievement alone, he was also a dedicated educator who understood that knowledge of history is a bastion against prejudice. Paul earned his PhD in history at Uppsala University in Sweden in 1996 and dedicated his entire career to writing and teaching about the Holocaust. Paul's book on Raoul Wallenberg and Swedish diplomacy in Budapest in 1944 to 45 helped to contextualize Wallenberg, destroying existing myths about the Swedish hero in the process.
Tell Me Your Children is Sweden's best-selling book after the Bible. In the course of his career, Paul
Günther, I'm not hearing you.
Yes, sorry.
Sure.
Thank you for watching this film. We will hear now from Elena Medvedev about the initiative. Elena was a long-term close friend and partner to Pola Levina. She's now studying at Freie University in the Institute for Judaistic, and she's also very dedicated in making this initiative work and initially bringing us together really for this event. Elena, please, the word is yours.
Thank you, Günther. As one American historian puts it, remembering is never just about the past. It is always about the present. The End of the Holocaust, Alvin Rosenfeld. Hello, everyone. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome you at our international conference in honor and in memory of Pola Levina. This event is a result of solidarity of many people and several international organizations. Dear Irina Radchenko, Professor Alvin Rozенfeld, Professor Омер Бартов, dear Stefan Brухfeld, thank you for accepting my invitation and giving your presentation today on our first webinar, Forward and Don't Forget, Writing and Teaching about Holocaust Today. Today, presenting our initiative, I will tell you more about it in a moment. I will play it for the importance of this physical collection, the library and the archive of Pola Levіна. But first of all, with all my gratitude, I'm turning to Professor Alvін Розенфельд, Professor Омер Бартов, and Professor Ursula Mindler-Steiner, who have supported our efforts from beginning. You, who gave me guidance and advice, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time and for your expertise. Dear Günther Yekeli and absolutely wonderful Abi Burgess, thank you for supporting me during this month in all technical and organizational matters. You made it possible for us to meet today. A special thank for Günther Yekeli for moderating our webinar. I want to express great gratitude to Rabbiner Akiva Weingarten, the light for the soul. Thank you, dear Rabbi Akiva, for your heart, for your understanding, and for supporting my mission from last year ongoing. Dear Natalie Kajan, Sandra Görgen, Rebecca Rogowski, Patricia Fromm, dear Professor Stefan Bronner, Professor Igor Shupak, dear Dr. John Bernstein, Dr. Johannes Mindler-Steiner, I thank you for being in touch and for your recommendations regarding the organizational process. I'm thankful to your excellencies, Ashot Sambatyan, current Armenian ambassador to Germany, Tigran Siranyan, current Armenian ambassador to the Ukraine, and Tigran Mikrchan, current ambassador of Armenia to Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonia, who Pola Levіна worked closely with, together with Dr. Vahak Avedian and me. This was Levina's last research work, started on the Armenian genocide. Thank you, Amir Gavrieli and Lian Trank, Eris Mayeras, Eamon McLaughlin, Jürgen Meschede, Charles Kingston, and Peter Carrier. Thank you for important contributions. Dear Tori Martinez and dear Chris Hale, thank you for being the great team by production of our intro, which we have seen before with some sound problems, but we have seen it. I greet my institution, Institute for Judaistic Freie University, and my great thank also goes to my dear family who loves and supports me. So who are we? What are we doing? What are our goals? We are an initiative of students, academics, and friends, feeling the importance to take care of Levine heritage, his library, research materials, and some unfinished work, a repository of lesson about man's inhumanity to man. We are aware of its significance because Levine, the hero of classroom, had ideas that deserve to live and to be continued in its developing. That's why our library initiative matters. You will hear more about Levine and his work from our wonderful speakers. And I also invite you, those who didn't yet, to take a look at our website and find more information. So again, why does the library Paul Levine matters? We are convinced because its archive includes unique manuscripts with narrative literature and historical potency. Also because of that unique spirit of a passionate American Holocaust historian, who together with a Swedish passionate Holocaust historian, changed understanding of the Holocaust in Sweden. And if to take in account the appearance of IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, then their work, the work of these two historians, was leading to significant European changes in commemoration of the Holocaust. And finally, there is one more reason why our library's initiative matters. This part of our story is sorrow upon sorrow, and I will tell you only shortly following. There is no gravestone for the Holocaust historian Paul Levine. Paul wished a gravestone for his own grave, and he often spoke about the line which should be written on it. But in reality, Levine's final resting place is an anonymous mass grave on a cemetery's roadside. And I will repeat following. Unavoidable is not the same as acceptable, as we have learned. However, and I shall argue, the initiative Paul Levine Library is looking forward to become once a real foundation, promoting science and ethics, a living memorial in tribute to the life's work of Paul Levine. Anyone who knew Professor Levine and his work and who is interested in helping to develop Levine's teaching and research ideas, I would be happy if you contact me for further collaboration. Forward, and don't forget. Thank you for joining us. And the panel is opened.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you for this very personal statement. We will go now on with our speakers. So our first speaker today is Professor Alvin Rozенfeld. Alvin Rozенfeld is now has become a friend, and I work closely with Professor Rozенfeld here at the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism at Indiana University. Professor Rozенfeld has worked many years on teaching about the Holocaust. He has taught probably thousands of students how to think, how to ask questions in many ways about the Holocaust. His latest book on this topic is entitled The End of the Holocaust, and that has been published in many languages. And I urge you to read it if you want to, if you're interested in these questions and how to commemorate the Holocaust, how to think about the Holocaust in the coming decades. The list of publications is far too long to mention here, and we have 4 speakers. So please take the occasion, as Elena also pointed out, on the website there is a lot of background information about all of the speakers. And without further ado, Alvin Rozенfeld, the word is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Günther, and special thanks to Elena for inviting me to participate in this conference. Elena, when I last saw you, it was in Berlin, and Paul was with you. And before that, we met in Moscow, and once again, Paul was with you. So I was shocked and deeply saddened to learn of his passing. And you're doing the right thing with this initiative. I'm happy to be supportive. Paul was a historian. My own training is as a literary scholar. And some 4 decades ago, I began reading deeply in Holocaust literature, and soon after began courses on this corpus of writing and also doing research and writing about these texts as well. To acquire and transmit knowledge about this subject is a daunting task. For probing deeply into the Nazi persecution and mass murder of the Jews can be intellectually disorienting and emotionally unnerving. There's nothing pleasurable whatsoever in carrying out such tasks, which force teachers and students alike to confront human cruelty, degradation, and destruction at their most extreme. Why one persists in pondering such horrors may vary from scholar to scholar, but most of us do what we do, I suspect, because minimally we feel we owe a debt to the dead, the least of which is to remember them and encourage others to do the same. Memory, therefore, is essential, but it's not easy to come by and not easy to preserve. Far from being firmly established, it is often contested, fragile, and in flux. In the remarks that follow, I allude to 4 writers who left us profoundly moving accounts of what Primo Levi, one of these writers, called Hitler's war against memory, Hitler's falsification of memory, falsification of reality, negation of reality. These destructive moves were part of what Levi called the greatest crime in the history of humanity. Those are his words. The obligation to remember that crime is a moral as well as a historical imperative. It impelled Levi and countless others to record and reflect on what they saw and suffered during the war years. Their role as witnesses to Nazi barbarism was fundamental to who they were and why they wrote. If we read them today and urge our students to do the same, we become belatedly but importantly witnesses for the witnesses. Murderous assaults against the Jews of Europe took place in various sites. Nazi-imposed ghettos, concentration and death camps, numerous small towns and villages, and open killing fields. In the literature about the ghetto experience, the Warsaw Diary of Chaim Kaplan is absolutely an essential text. Written in Hebrew from September 1, 1939 to August the 4th, 1942, the diary is an anguished chronicle of Jewish Warsaw in its death throes, as vivid and detailed an account of life under Nazi tyranny as any we have. Under increasingly punishing circumstances, often without food, his hands frozen for lack of heat, Kaplan confessed at times that he no longer had the strength to hold a pen in my hand. I'm broken, shattered, he wrote. And yet he felt the need to continue recording as a sacred task. I quote him, "It's difficult to write," he lamented, "but I consider it an obligation and I'm determined to fulfill it with my last ounce of energy. I will write a scroll of agony to remember the past and the future." The agony intensified as Kaplan witnessed the daily escalation of Nazi cruelty and destruction. Friends who knew he was recording the horrible deeds urged him to stop writing. Why continue, they asked. For what purpose? Will you live to see it published? Will these words of yours reach the ears of future generations? Kaplan recognized the likely truth of what his friends were telling him, and yet he kept going. In spite of it all, he wrote, I refuse to listen to them. I feel that continuing this diary to the very end of my physical and spiritual strength is a historical mission which must not be abandoned. My mind is still clear. My need to record unstilled, though it is now 5 days since any real food has passed my lips, but I will not silence my diary. As you can hear in these words, Kaplan's resolve to keep writing was unshakable, even under the worst of circumstances. His last entry, dated August the 4th, 1942, foresees his coming end. He writes, my life is forfeit and suspended over nothingness. Shortly afterwards, he and his wife were seized and transported to Treblinka, where they perished soon after their arrival. The very last words of his diary read as follows: if my life ends, what will become of my diary? The answer to that question is clear. Kaplan is gone, but his book survives, but only to the degree we choose to take and keep alive the memory he inscribed of Jewish Warsaw in its final days. The fate of Kaplan's elegiac testimony to the sufferings of those days, and with it the fate of a significant part of Holocaust memory itself, now lies with us, his readers. The same is true for the writings of Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi, Imre Kertész, and numerous others who knew Nazi terror firsthand and have given us invaluable accounts of its lethal costs to millions of innocent people. All three writers had been incarcerated in Auschwitz and other camps. Following their liberation, they felt obliged to testify about the Nazi slaughter, which Levi called the central event of the 20th century. Their literary choices, styles, and modes differ from author to author, but their motives for writing are similar and might be summed up by these words of Elie Wiesel, which I quote from the preface to his first book, Night. Without this testimony, he writes, my life as a writer, or my life period, would not have become what it is, that of a witness who believes he has a moral obligation to try to prevent the enemy from enjoying one last victory by allowing his crimes to be erased from human memory. For the survivor who chooses to testify, it's clear his duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. To forget would be not only dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. All of that quoted from Wiesel. To keep the dead from being forgotten, Wiesel devoted most of his life in the post-war period to writing about the war that Hitler and his accomplices waged. Not only he wrote against Jewish men, women, and children, but also against Jewish religion, Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, and Jewish memory. In book after book, Levy did the same, warning in the last chapter of his last book that his memory fades and becomes distant and blurred. What happened can happen again. Those are his words. And he then said, this is the core of what we have to say. What happened can happen again. Imre Kertész concurs, writing late in his life, and I quote him, that the anti-Semite of our age no longer merely loathes Jews, he wants Auschwitz. Auschwitz, in fact, occurred, he continues, and what once was can be again. These are ominous words, and versions of them appear in the writings of these authors and many others. They link the future fate of humankind itself to the fate of Holocaust memory. To remain alive, memory depends on knowledge of the past. And with respect to this past, sources of knowledge are not lacking. In fact, the Nazi persecution and mass murder of the Jews may well be the most copiously documented crime in history. If we ask, though, what people today actually know about the Holocaust, the results can be terribly disheartening. In September of this year, for instance, the Claims Conference issued a report on Holocaust awareness among Americans. Among their findings are the following. 63% of all national survey respondents do not know that 6 million Jews were murdered, and 36% thought that 2 million or fewer Jews were killed during the Holocaust. Additionally, although there may have been as many as 40,000 camps, ghettos, prisons, and other incarceration sites during this period, 48% of survey respondents in America cannot name a single camp or ghetto. Additionally, 15% of respondents believe it is acceptable to hold neo-Nazi views today. 11% of these respondents believe that Jews actually caused the Holocaust. And in younger generations in New York, 20% feel the Jews caused the Holocaust. Especially troublesome is that 23% of respondents believe the Holocaust happened, but the number of Jews who died has been greatly exaggerated, is a myth, or did not happen, or are unsure. We learned in polls that on average, a quarter of the people in European countries today hold anti-Semitic views, and in some of those countries, the figures are closer to 50%. In many Middle Eastern and North African countries, the figures are even higher. So how can we best respond to this sorry state of affairs? The philosopher Emil Fackenheim added an additional commandment to the commandments that faithful people are expected to observe. Fackenheim coined this commandment, "Thou shalt not hand Hitler any posthumous victories." One way, an essential way, to keep Hitler from prevailing is to keep alive the memory of the millions who suffered and died under Nazi rule. As co-author of Tell Ye Your Children, Levine lived up to that commandment. We should follow his example and do no less. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin. Before we go into comments or perhaps even questions on this, we will go through all of the speakers, and then also for the audience, you have then a chance to put your questions or comments in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can then go over it. So we'll continue now with our second distinguished speaker, Professor Omar Bартов from Brown University. I think Professor Bартov is probably well known for many for his early work on the Wehrmacht and the Nazi indoctrination and their crimes. His book entitled The Eastern Front, 1941 to 1945, and Hitler's Army. And he has worked also on interethnic relations in the borderlands of Eastern Europe and the politics of memory, and I think most specifically in Ukraine or Western Ukraine. He recently published The Anatomy of a Genocide, the life and death of a town called Bushjaj. That was 2 years ago. And the book won many prizes, including the National Jewish Book Award and the Yad Vashem International Book Prize for Holocaust Research. And so maybe this is something that you might also want to look up if you go into looking up the speakers. But I won't take more time in introducing the speakers, but Professor Bартов, please, the word is yours. And we have roughly, as I said, 15 minutes per speaker, but if we go a little bit over that, that's going to be fine. But we all in all have only 90 minutes for this webinar, which I realize now already is much too short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunther, and thank you very much, Elena. I last met Elena in Berlin. We visited Paul's gravesite. It was not long after I heard of his passing and was quite devastated to hear that. I knew Paul for almost 30 years. Since the early mid-90s, he came to Rutgers Jewish University, where I was teaching at the time, and studied with me, and we became friends. He spent about a year there. We got to know each other quite well, and subsequently we were in touch many times. We met in Stockholm, we met in Berlin in some conferences. We spoke, I think, most recently in the spring before his death when I was in Tel Aviv. So it was a very shocking moment for me. And I'm very glad and thankful that Elena and everyone else have organized this event. When I met Paul at the time, I was still working on the Wehrmacht. I had just published my second book, Hitler's Army, and was still engaged in these issues. And today I will try very briefly, of course, in the very little time I have, to draw a trajectory from that early work to the book that was just mentioned, Anatomy of a Genocide, and my recent interest through the following prism, which is the title of this talk, Genocide from Below, Rewriting the Holocaust as First-Person Local History. When I started working on the Wehrmacht, which was in the early 1980s, the Wehrmacht was still seen as an honorable institution that had fended off the barbarous Asiatic hordes that were threatening not only the Third Reich, but the rest of Europe, while behind its back, nasty elements of the Nazi regime, the SS, the black shirts, were committing crimes. At the time, there was already early work on trying to revise that historiography, some very important books by German scholars. Most of that work looked, however, at the Wehrmacht from the top, that is, at how institutions which were in charge of the German army, high-ranking generals, the upper echelons, were involved in both working with the Nazi regime and in trying to indoctrinate German soldiers into Nazi ideology. But very few looked at what was happening among the combat units themselves. And that was what I tried to do in my dissertation and then in my first two books, to have a view from below, to see what was the experience of German soldiers fighting at the front, where did they come from, how were they educated, and what did they do at the front. I won't go into the details of that, of course, now, but I'll just summarize by saying that clearly, as came out from this work, combat units, those at the front, which were supposedly clean from all those crimes committed behind their backs, were in fact engaged in war crimes, in crimes against humanity, and in genocide, which is not surprising when you think of the fact that in the war on the Eastern Front, between 20 and 30 million Soviet citizens died, most of them civilians, and someone had to kill them. And so the Wehrmacht was deeply involved in that. The important other aspect of this was that when this kind of engagement of the Wehrmacht was revealed and debated in Germany, it was very difficult for German audiences, for the German public to accept this. And the reason was that it's much easier to say, at the time it had been accepted, that Germany had been engaged in the Holocaust. It's much more difficult to say that an institution such as the Wehrmacht, which represented much of German society, that every German had a family member who had fought in, who had been somehow related to, was also, as it turned out, a criminal institution. And so that was something that took many years for the German public to come to terms with, going on well into the late 1990s, and a debate that occurred at the time about the crimes of the Wehrmacht surrounding an exhibition, a photographic and documentary exhibition that showed that. And even after that, it is still a very difficult point to speak about, because the Wehrmacht in that sense represented much of German society. Now, moving to what I've become engaged in the last 20 years, and the book that I published, Anatomy of a Genocide, was the result of a good 2 decades of research and engagement. In a sense, I went back to the same concept of a view from below, when I wrote on the Wehrmacht, what I did, I chose 3 combat divisions, because obviously one could not study the entire Wehrmacht, which had hundreds of divisions and up to 20 million men who went through the ranks. And when I started thinking about what I saw as problems with Holocaust historiography, I also thought that the best way to engage with them would be to do a local study. The problems that I saw in Holocaust historiography were that by and large, even as the Holocaust became increasingly recognized as a main event in World War II, in German history, in the history of the 20th century, in the history of genocide, and was no longer seen only as a Jewish event, even then, the concept of the Holocaust was very much that it was, as I myself once described it in a subtitle of another book, a case of industrial killing, a case in which Jews were plucked out of where they had lived, put on trains, sent to extermination camps, and then often in a process that might have lasted only 2 hours, were killed, were undressed, were shaven, were put into gas chambers, were gassed, and then were either buried in mass graves or incinerated. And so that there was very little contact between the perpetrators and the victims, and that much of the public anywhere was not aware of that, did not see it, that it was anonymous and that it was secret. And I became increasingly interested in the question of the encounter between the victims and the perpetrators. I became actually interested in that already in the 1990s, in the wake of the genocides in Rwanda and Bosnia, which were very different from our view of what the Holocaust was about. That is, they were very intimate genocides in which neighbors killed neighbors. People were killing those they knew, those they had lived next to. So in order to examine this, I decided to choose a town in Eastern Europe, and the town I chose was Buchach. It's a typical town in Eastern Europe where most of the Jews had lived and most of the Jews were murdered. I had a personal connection to that town because my mother was born there, and she came from that town in 1935, so she was not there during the Holocaust, but she spent the first 11 years of her life there. And I also knew something about that town because a very famous author came from that town, Shmuel Yosef Agnon, who is the only Hebrew language author to have received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1966. And much of what he wrote was about Buchach, or the culture and life of East European Jewry, particularly small town East European Jewry. But beyond that, I knew very little about this town. And I thought that if one looked at one town and tried to figure out what happened there during the genocide, one might see things that one would not see when looking from the top. A view von unten, as one would say in German, from below, is very different from this notion of an Überblick, of looking from the top. I won't go into all this because I will run out of time, and I'll just say the following. First of all, one thing that became clear was that there was not simply an encounter between the perpetrators and the victims, because these towns that we imagined, especially people growing up on Jewish myth and lore, were shtetl, were Jewish towns, were never pure Jewish towns. These were towns in which Jews lived with Christians, with others. And in the area that I studied, Eastern Galicia, that meant that they lived together with Poles and Ukrainians. And so as I started studying the relationships between the different groups, I realized that the nature of what happened there during the Holocaust was not only a result of the German clear intention to murder the Jews of that region, that town and the region in which it was, but also of the relationships between Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians. And that determined the manner in which that genocide occurred. Secondly, it became, of course, clear, or not so, of course, but it became clear as I was doing this work that the killing was not at all secret and was not at all anonymous. And if we extend that from this one little town to the entire swath of territory from the Baltics to the Balkans, a territory where much of European Jewry lived and where it lived mostly in inter-ethnic towns, we will discover that about what I saw in Buchach is relevant to about half of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, that half that was not killed in extermination camps, or even if they were, before they were killed in extermination camps, had lived in those towns. So what happens in a town like Buchach is that the Germans arrived there in late summer 1941. This is after the invasion of the Soviet Union. But they begin the mass killing only the following summer, and in Buchach only in the fall. So for over a year, the Germans in that area are not engaged in mass killing. And they develop close relationships with the Jews, because the Jews act in those towns as their cooks, as their drivers, as their tailors, as their doctors, as their babysitters. They come in and out of German homes. The Germans get to know them by name. And this is not only the German police forces which are there, but also the administrative staff, which is, of course, in every town, including their wives, their children, people who are not active in any role, but family members who come to those areas. So that when the killing begins, the killing is already of people who are known to each other, often by name. Additionally, in a place like Buchach, where there were about 8,000 Jews in 1939, about half of the population of the town, about 10,000 Jews were killed. That is, the 8,000 who were there, plus people who were brought from nearby villages and towns. In the region as a whole, there were about 60,000 Jews. The area of Buchach and another town called Chortkov. It was in that other town that the security police, the Sicherheitspolizei, had its Außenstelle, its outpost. That outpost, which was charged with killing the Jews in the region, numbered about 20 people, 20 men. Those 20 men, mostly German, but also ethnic German from Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, were managed to kill 60,000 Jews between late summer 1942 and early summer 1943. Now, obviously, 20 men cannot kill so many people scattered throughout a pretty large region in small towns and villages. So what became clear is that in order to accomplish this, they needed massive collaboration from the local population. And so what you see when you look below, when you try to see the dynamics of what is happening on the local scale, you realize that this kind of local genocide, which can be multiplied by numerous towns, hundreds of such towns, was in fact a social event in which everyone was engaged. And this brings me to some sort of concluding observations that I would like to very briefly make to point out what I think are the sort of benefits of rewriting the Holocaust from this perspective. So as I said, first of all, we find that about half of the victims of the Holocaust were not killed in this kind of industrial killing, but were killed where they lived. And all of these towns, if you go to them today, are surrounded by mass graves. The former Jewish population that had lived there until 41, 2, 3, 4 are still buried, around these towns, usually in unmarked graves. Secondly, as I said, there were big debates in Germany over the years about what people knew, how secret this was. Did people think what happened when Jews were sent to the East? Well, in these towns, everybody knew and everybody saw. The killings were neither secret nor anonymous, but rather they were public and they were intimate. The killing took place around the town and everyone could see and hear, and often people went to look what it looks like because they were curious. That's the neighbors, other people. It shows that the distinction, when you do such a study, that the distinction between perpetrators, victims, and bystanders does not apply in the way that we would like it to apply. And the most important thing that I would say here, for lack of time, is that the concept of bystanders becomes very complicated. We like the term bystanders because, you know, we wouldn't like to see ourselves as victims, and we cannot imagine ourselves as perpetrators. And so bystanders are those who stand by. But in towns like this, nobody could stand by. Everyone was engaged on one level or another. And that, of course, is a lesson that we have to understand not only about the Holocaust, but about any genocide, and not only about genocides, but about any neighborhood, any place in which we live, where the distinctions between those who are victimized and those who are victimizing them have to do also with the rest of the population and its engagement in such cases. Another important finding for me was that it becomes very difficult to distinguish between what we like to call good and evil. There are, of course, always some people who appear to be entirely evil and they just enjoy the killing. And there are a few people who are entirely altruistic and do only good, but most people are neither here nor there. And when you examine what happens in a place like this, you realize, to give you just one example, most of the Jews who survived, and very few survived, but most of those who survived because somebody helped them. It was almost impossible to survive without being helped. And the people who could help you were usually your neighbors or other Christians in the area who would give you shelter. And that was very dangerous to do, and there were people who did it. On the other hand, most of the people who were killed after the mass German organized killing, after the area was declared Judenrein in 1943, in June 1943, most of those Jews were denounced by their neighbors and then were hunted down, often not by the Germans, but by the Ukrainian police. And so this distinction between who is good and who is evil becomes much more difficult. And there are many, many examples that you find when you study this from below. So another important element in such a study from below, and that's one of the final points I'll make, is that in order to understand that, you have to hear the voices coming from the town itself. You cannot rely only on official documentation, because official documentation is documentation produced by the perpetrators. The victims have no opportunity. We heard, of course, there were diaries, there were attempts in ghettos to do that. In towns such as Buchach, it was impossible to do. So if you want to understand how people experienced what they experienced and what was happening to them that was of no interest to the perpetrators, you have to listen to them. And the way to listen to them is to read their diaries, to read their letters, and to listen to their post-war testimonies among those who survived. And that creates a much more complex three-dimensional picture of the event, where you can see the same thing happening through the eyes of the victims, through the eyes of the bystanders to the extent that they exist, and through the eyes of the perpetrators. And the final thing I would say, because I'm running out of time, is that what you find in such local cases, which perhaps is the most depressing, is that so much of what happens on the ground has to do with property. That so much of the killing is about petty interest in acquiring property, and that interest in property in poor communities is one that makes people immediately complicit in what occurs. So that if you are neighbors, with a Jewish family and friends with that family, and one day that family is taken out and killed, often you will take over their property simply because if you don't do it, someone else will do it. And once you have done that, you've moved into their apartment, you sleep now in their beds, you use their pots and pans, you have become part of that process. And eventually, as we know, most people, both the perpetrators and those complicit bystanders, get away with genocide. And it is extremely rare that they're brought to justice. So I'll end with this, and I hope we have a good discussion. And again, thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you for this very, I would say, detailed insight into how you think and how you do your research. That was very interesting to me, and I'm sure also for many others. And I hope that we can discuss that a little bit. But we will move on now to the third speaker, Ірина Радченко. She works on those people who you, Professor Bardov, maybe would name those who are rather on the good side, those who rescued Jews. And she's a PhD candidate at in Ukraine. And she leads also the scientific department of the Tkuma Ukrainian Institute for Holocaust Studies and the Museum Jewish History and Holocaust in Ukraine. And if I understand correctly, Irina, you were responsible for that. This is now also live streamed on YouTube, if I understand that correctly. So thank you for doing this. And Irina, she published also, edited a book series with the Tkuma Institute. And one of these books that was then in this series is Tell You Your Children by Pola Levіна and Stefan Brухfельд, that was done in Ukrainian. So you probably, through this work, also got to know Pola Levіна. So yes, the word is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody, again. I would like to thank you, all organizers, for this event, especially for you, Günther, for especially Yelena Medvedev and others. So for me, it's a big honor. It's a big pleasure. It's a big responsibility at the moment to speak about the memory of the heritage of Professor Pola Levіна. But I would like to some moments about some problems with not only with the books, but I mean with some special studies, Holocaust studies in Ukraine. As we know, the policy of remembrance policy of the Holocaust in the Soviet Union was considered in the context of Second World War, and especially special term like a Great Patriotic War by Soviet leaders, by Soviet ideology. So the Holocaust was not meant like a special fate for Jewish victims. So only after the during the era of perestroika and after the Soviet Union collapsed, special attention was due to this moment. So I would like to that, according to some researchers, the interest to the Holocaust studies was due to some reasons. especially its more effective activities of non-governmental agencies, organizations, especially in Ukraine. It's known that after the International Holocaust Forum in Stockholm, so the Ministry of Education and Science in Ukraine recommended the Holocaust topic, the Holocaust studies, and introduced into some school curriculums, but in some maybe brief forms, maybe compared to other countries, I mean Western countries, of course. It was noted that some pupils in schools who studies Holocaust in schools do not know who the Jews are, because they have not studied the history, the complex history of the Jewish people. So there is some problems with the lack of holistic visions on Holocaust age, of course. Maybe development of studies on the Holocaust on this topic takes place with the active participation of some organizations, scientific organizations in our country, in Ukraine. In particular, we talk about some institution of the Dnieper, of Kiev, and other cities, of Ukrainian cities, I mean. For example, the Ukrainian Institute for Holocaust Studies, Tkuma, in Dnipro was opened in 1999, and it was Museum Jewish Memory, the Holocaust in Ukraine was opened in 2012. Since then, this organization, this institution has organized some lot of seminars, methodological, scientific, educational, which were attended a lot of educators, of course, students, pupils, and other people. In addition to seminar, various educational and training events were held, and some of them are held with the assistance of the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. So you can see there are a lot of special manuals and dedicated to world history, Holocaust history of Ukraine, and you can see that some pages dedicated with the Holocaust, studies of the Holocaust in Ukraine and studies Holocaust in world context, I mean, of course. Annual competition of scientific works of pupils, students, graduate students, pleading with the participation of some leading scholars, historians were held on the basis of this scientific institution like at Tkuma, like some others in Ukraine. So currently, according to maybe modern conditions, I mean COVID and other such events are held online in forms, a series of webinars on topic most acute and relevant to the Ukrainian educational space, civil society in general, of course. You can see a lot of this materials, and I would like your attention on this program. It's a history of Holocaust curriculum for students, grades 10 and 11, for general secondary education institution. It's known it's not first this curriculum, but it was written by director of the Ukrainian Institute of Holocaust Studies and Museum of Jewish Memory Holocaust in Ukraine, PhD, Dr. Igor Shupak. He is the author of some materials, some this curriculum programs, and a lot of manuals, which you can see in previous slides. These some maybe examples of our events which were held in the basis of Tkuma Institute and other institutions in Ukraine. You can see the participants, it's the pupils from secondary schools, minor Academy of Science of Ukraine. It's like some first scholar stage for pupils, which encouraged them to research Holocaust studies in the future. I mean, of course, and of course, final of creative works contest with the names Lessons of War and Holocaust Lessons of Tolerance. It's our annual competition, it's our annual contest, which were held in some places, not only in Dnipro, but for example in Kiev, and it will have in September like a commemoration to victims of people who Jewish people who were killed in Babi Yar in 1941. Maybe of course important part of the teaching process, modern teaching process in our country is a particular textbook, Tell Your Children. So writing and first published in 1998 as part of the Swedish Living Project. Living History Project. These books reveals various aspects of pre-war life of the Jewish population in Europe, from the establishment of the Nazi regime to the events of Second World War and the Holocaust, of course. But Ukrainian version of this book maybe is consists of some parts. The first parts, it's the main parts, of course, written by Dr. Pola Levіна and Stefan Brухfельd. These authors introduced readers with the Holocaust and other genocide, for example, Roma genocide, genocide of some other groups, social groups committed by Nazi authorities, by providing memories of both the victims and their executions. They emphasize the brutality and systematic nature of massacres. This part was translated too into Ukrainian by my colleague Evgenia Salamaha. She is a philologist and staff member of the Tkuma Institute. And of course, some parts of Ukrainian version and titled In Jews in Ukraine, Holocaust by Bullets were written by Igor Shupak. As I previously told, candidate of PhD, director of Ukrainian Institute of Holocaust Studies, Tkuma. Dr. Igor Shupak begins this part with the you can see that from the description of pre-war life of the Jewish people on the territory of Ukraine. Special emphasis is placed on inter-ethnic relation between the two nations. Most of the section is devoted, in fact, the Holocaust in Ukraine. All this, you can see these parts, Holocaust by bullets with the some maybe main stages in the genocide in Ukraine. Also, working process on this book lasted several years, as Professor Stefan Brухfельд could confirm it. A certain complication of this process maybe was both purely technical issues. I mean, some illustrations, some obtaining copyright on this illustration, and of course, some substantive questions. The desire to convey essential information about the history of the Jewish book, their life in Ukraine, and of course, the Holocaust tragedy. Finally, the Ukraine part was added to book, and as a visual materials, photographs of individuals, exhibits from Museum of the Jewish Memory in the Holocaust Ukraine funds were included in Ukrainian parts. My colleague Vlad Bozilevsky, employee of the educational department, was responsible for this part of book. For my part, I was the coordinator of this creative process, and together with the Marina Strelchuk, she's a researcher at Tkuma Institute, we were the scientific editors of this publication, I mean Ukrainian version of this book. Yeah. It's worth noting that we wanted to publish not only a popular book, but also one that will be useful in the Holocaust studies and research and further research. That's why we initiated an appeal to the Ministry of Education and Science in Ukraine with the request to obtain a stamp, special stamp on the use of this publication as a textbook in secondary schools, which was eventually provided for us. Although the book Tell Your Children is an attempt to present of historical events in simple, available, and maybe conscious form, it has significant potential as educational materials for pupils, for students, for educators, of course, as it allows you to maybe emotionally imagine main stages of the Holocaust in Europe and especially in Ukraine with a lot of some illustrations, some materials, memories of specific people. I mean, of course, like witnesses of this tragedy. Professor Pola Levin's and Stefan Brухfeld books, Tell Your Children, is obviously an effort and a very successful, as we know, to examine the horrific events, terrible events of the Holocaust in Europe in descriptive language. The Ukraine section located in the middle of the book, which is example of considering the events of the Holocaust Ukraine not separately from European, but in the context of world history, especially history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, I mean, of course, we talk about them, this publication was presented in various events, including books forum, special books forum, seminars, mobile classes, and more events. The Ukrainian language edition was provided to teachers in the schools and educational institutions, which contributed to the spread of interest and demand on this form of book. This interest in the publication continues through the form, through its form, volume, teaching methods. I mean, popular, but at the same time academic. The use of additional materials and some two books, I mean, the photos, maps, and posters with this book. It is important that after the publication of this book, almost the entire circulation was sent to various educational institutions. On its basis, optional programs and methodological seminars were developed and supplemented. The publication is universal in nature and encouraged for the interest in Holocaust study and the genocide of individual people in general. You can see the some images. So this presentation of the books in some forum in Ukraine, for example, in Lviv or Lvov, this city, and of course the presentation in Kiev, and in the final creative work contest, you can see this special place from Dnipro Regional State Administration, in which this contest was held in 2018. For modern Ukraine is a state of deep political crisis and actual war. Understanding the lessons of Holocaust is extremely important, of course. The publication of the Ukrainian version of this book, Tell Your Children, continues to be one of the significant steps in the process of transforming the historical memory of the Holocaust. Finally, maybe I would like to note that I believe that these books is a certain maybe tribute to the memory of outstanding scientists and Holocaust researcher like was Professor Pola Levina. I really thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irina Radchenko. It's always good to see how teaching about the Holocaust then works really in the classroom, in the settings, in also the administration. And again, we don't have time really now to go into that. We will run over time anyway. That was a little bit predictable. So that's often the nature if we want to discuss things and we don't have enough time. But I want to turn now to our last speaker, Stefan Brухfельд, who co-authored this very important book, Tell Your Children. In 1998, I think was the first time it was published, and then translated in so many languages, and a really successful book in Sweden and also in other countries. It was nominated, I read, for the Deutsche Jugendliteraturpreis even, and was translated recently again in Croatia and Ukraine. His own work is on the National League of Sweden in between the years 1938 and 46. He has published a number of articles and other publications on Holocaust denial, on reflections of the term Holocaust, if I understand that correctly, because I think that was in Swedish. No, it was not. Sorry.
Both.
Okay, good. So, but this is, of course, it is an important debate. I know this debate a little bit from from France, where I worked for many years and lived there. And you also work on the Nazi German worldview and its propaganda. But most importantly, maybe also to this webinar today, is your very close relationship and work with Pola Levina. So please, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Günther. Thank you very much, Irina, for your presentation, which was very gratifying to hear how much you've been able to do in the Ukraine. And of course, thank you very much to Elena and others who have worked for this initiative, worked very hard, and given me the opportunity to say a few words about Paul and the work that we did together. There isn't much time, so I will have to focus. There is much to say on Paul's importance for Holocaust studies in Sweden. We'll have to leave that for another occasion. There's also a lot to say about Paul's role in the development of Holocaust education in Sweden, of which the book Tell Your Children is a part. But we'll have to leave that also for another time. So I will focus during these 15 minutes or less that I have, I don't know, on how we came to work together and what that was like, and the background to actually Tell Your Children. So the first time I met Paul was in March 1995 at the northern university town of Umeå in Sweden for the first conference, as far as I know, the first conference ever in Sweden, academic conference on the subject of anti-Semitism. So there were a number of people gathered there for a few days, and this is the first time I met Paul. We talked a little. We didn't really engage with one another. He was working the last year of his dissertation, which he presented in June the next year in '96 at Uppsala University. I at the time was working I was the CEO of the Swedish Committee Against Anti-Semitism. So in June 96, Paul contacted me after the dissertation, and he wanted to meet with me and another person who is a specialist in anti-Semitism, and I think, Günther, you might know him, Henrik Bachner, to talk about what could be done, what the committee could do, and what Paul could do to further the cause of Holocaust education in Sweden. At the time, the Swedish committee had just begun, or a little over a year, since the spring of '95, to work with Holocaust education, teacher seminars, and other things. I had just returned from Poland, my first trip there, and the plan was, the committee plan was to begin small with teachers, local politicians, et cetera, and build upwards from there. So this was the plan in '96. The first trip I made with Paul to Poland was in October '96, where the committee invited him to follow on an exploratory mission to Poland to see what could be done for bringing teachers there and having seminars, etc., Swedish teachers. So this was in October '96. And then in '97, the planning began for a major teacher seminar and seminars in Sweden, a trip to Poland, 10-day trip, and also post-trip seminars afterwards. And Paul was very heavily engaged in that. Now, in June '97, before the trip was in August, at the last meeting in the Swedish Parliament before the summer, Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson, out of the blue, actually, said that in the fall, the Swedish government would begin a project of Holocaust education, and one of the things would be a book about the Holocaust to be distributed to parents, not children, to parents of who had children still in school between the ages of 12 and 19 years old. And this booklet or book was supposed to be a tool for the parents to discuss democratic values, etc., with their children, starting from the history of the Holocaust. And I heard this speech of the Prime Minister in June. I had my television on, and my first thought was, when I heard him say this, that this publication would be published in the fall, was who the expletive will have the time to write that? Because I knew that we weren't many people in Sweden who could write about this at all. And then nothing happened. The summer went and nothing happened. And suddenly in October, I get a phone call from the government offices asking me to come to a meeting to discuss who could be engaged in a book. And I asked them to contact Paul. I said no, I couldn't be part of it because I had other things to do at the time. It's a quite a complicated story, but in the end, eventually in November, the work with the book starts, and the government has Paul, who is a relatively fresh PhD, and myself, who wasn't a PhD, and I'm not even yet a PhD. And actually, the government took a huge risk because we were complete unknowns. But we were responsible for this project. So in mid-November, we have our really only meeting with the Prime Minister's office, with them explaining for us what they wanted us to do. And I have still the notebook from that meeting, and I only wrote down one thing. There has to be something about Anne Frank. This was actually the only wish from the Prime Minister's closest advisors, something about Anne Frank. And actually, Paul and I had thought that we wouldn't have anything about Anne Frank, but okay, so this was their only requirement, actually. And then they said, well, we are thinking of a publication with 40 pages and 15 pictures. And we immediately said, can't do it. And what was their response? Well, do what you want. So this is what we did. And there are many things to say about this process. We began in mid-November 97. And the plan was, well, the task was to write for adults. And the government said, or the Prime Minister's office said, they were going to publish about 100,000 copies of the book. The book was to be offered free for these families if they asked for the book, if they requested the book. It wasn't sent out automatically. It had to be requested. So we worked very hard for 8 weeks. Paul liked to say 6 weeks. This is one of the things we disagreed about, because the time span was 8 weeks between mid-November and mid-January, when we went to the printers on the morning of the 16th January. But he only counted the weeks we actually worked. So he said 6 weeks. I said, well, okay, 7 weeks, but actually it's 8 weeks, because it's not only in between time is also important when you work on something. But anyway, this is a thing we never agreed upon. But what is interesting about the process is that we had help. We had a very important picture editor. We had a very important layout person and others who helped us. And it was a very strange process, because we always felt that we had a good tailwind. We worked really hard, not normal hours. And when we finally got, after about 2 weeks into the process, we finally got sort of a key insight in how the book should be structured. Everything just went very smoothly. And an interesting thing is that we never fought. Paul and I never fought. We could argue about, should we do this, should we do that, but we never fought. We always agreed upon every decision we took was always in agreement. And this, I think, is characteristic of how Paul and I worked over the years in general. We were a good team. And there's something that I had with Paul, and only Paul, is sort of a room that was just our own room, and where we could discuss all kinds of things, of course related to the Holocaust, but also other things. And I was just thinking about one thing now, and it's that it's the 7th of December, which in history is known as the Day of Infamy, as Roosevelt said in 1941, 79 years ago, after the attack against Pearl Harbor. But it's also the day of the first transports to the same date in 1941, the first transports to the Tkuma death camp in the Warthegau, and which began operating on the 8th of December. And this is a typical thing that Paul and I would share over, for instance, WhatsApp or maybe in a Skype conversation or any other means of communication. It's this date, and how are they connected, etc., and what does it mean today? Anyway, the book was published in end of January, beginning of February 98. And what happened then, this is interesting, because these things cannot be planned. No one had any idea of what the response would be. The government said that they would be very happy with the response of 20,000 people requesting the book. That would be a very good result for such a campaign. And what happened in the first week of February was that 160,000 requests came in to the government offices, which completely changed the whole dynamic. And I think the the response of the Swedish public is actually what is the reason that we today have an organization like the IHRA, etc. Without that, we wouldn't have had that, or it wouldn't have happened in that way, because of the ongoing requests. I mean, it just snowballed. The Prime Minister wrote a letter to his very good friends Tony and Bill, Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, and to inform them about the Swedish campaign and the response, and ask them if they were interested in a joint project, which they were. And so in May '98, there is a first meeting of the three countries in Sweden, and this is actually the beginning of what then, or what is today, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. And then the book continued to be printed and reprinted in Sweden. There are many now editions, or several editions. It's been updated a number of times, and there is a new chapter on Sweden and the Holocaust, which wasn't in the original edition. And it was translated into, I think the first foreign translation was the German translation, Erzählt es euren Kindern. And I think we have our wonderful German editor, who was then at Bertelsmann, among the listeners, Ulrich Blume. Hi, Ulrich. And then the French edition followed, etc., etc., etc. And it's been an amazing journey for both Paul and I over the years. Completely unexpected. Who knew? And there are many memories I have with Paul. I mean, visiting different places on the continent and the traces of the Holocaust. But I'll just, among many, many other stories, I'll just mention two things from a visit we had in May 2000 in Moscow, when the Russian edition was published, which was a big thing because it was a co-joint effort by the Swedish and the Russian governments at the time. So there was a presentation at the Swedish embassy, and then we also together visited several places, Paul and I, on our own. One of them was the Lenin Mausoleum. I don't know how it is today, but when we entered the mausoleum, it was completely empty. It was just Paul and I there. So we made the rounds around around Lenin's body, and we stopped to talk, to discuss the place and all kinds of things. But as soon as we stopped, or I mean, 10 seconds, after 10 seconds, a soldier, a guard came to us and just pushed us with his rifle. Keep moving, keep moving. So even if there were no other people there, just Paul and I, and we couldn't stand there. We had to move. This was the rules, or were the rules. And the next thing is a visit to an exhibition which was on in Moscow at the time. I think the Russian expression was the downfall of the Third Reich, but it was translated as the agony of the Third Reich, which exhibited different things the Soviet armies had captured on their way into Germany, flags and all kinds of things, artifacts. And there was a glass booth with one of Hitler's uniforms, the light maroon uniform, the very simple uniform he sometimes had. And then there was also a piece of a skull, which was presented as Hitler's, part of Hitler's skull. And we stood there looking at this, and I remember what Paul said. And he had forgotten about this, but I reminded him last year in August, one of the last Skype conversations we had, what he said standing there. He said, I don't think this is so good for my soul. Looking at this piece of Hitler's skull. He didn't explain how and why, but this is what he said. And there are so many other things, so many memories from these years, and so many other things to say. But Paul was a very, very close friend, and very. I've worked with other people, but we were completely different people, but we worked very well together, and I'm very grateful for what we could accomplish over the years. So this was my very, very short version, too long already, and I hope to be able to say more at another time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan, for your very personal account. I think that brings us all a bit closer to the person, Paul Levine. And we are running out of time, that is for sure. But if you all agree, I think it would be good to extend maybe another 5 minutes or so, if that's okay for all of you, to give a chance maybe of a short reflection, at least, maybe from all of the speakers. What do you think, either if you want to make it personally, about what you think, how Paul would think about these issues of the future of education about the Holocaust and learning and teaching about the Holocaust, or would you personally think of that question? Maybe we can finish with that, and if there are questions from the audience, please put this in the Q&A or in the chat, and then we can see that here. Maybe we can go in the order of the speakers, so we can get a very brief outlook where you think the next decade, or maybe decades even, will go, and what are important tasks maybe for us as well as scholars and teachers. Alvin, maybe you want to start with some reflections on that, if you may.
Right, glad to, although just very briefly. As I mentioned in my own presentation, the Holocaust may be the most copiously documented crime in history. We don't lack for sources. We know a great deal. And for years and years, there have been lots of courses taught on the subject, lots of books written about it on both the scholarly level and the popular level. There are museums dedicated to the Holocaust. Some people make trips to the sites in Poland, Germany, and elsewhere where it all took place, all of which is heartening. It would tend to make us believe that knowledge of the Holocaust, memory of the Holocaust is here to stay. And yet, as I cited the results of certain polls recently, which are credible surveys of what people know and what they care about, the results are pretty appalling. So the real question before us, therefore, is what's gone wrong? Why is it that despite all we know and many years of vigorous effort on a widespread scale to transmit knowledge of the Holocaust, there is this resistance to absorbing the knowledge, and a great deal of misinformation, disinformation. We have our work cut out for us. There's no doubt about it. Paul was very dedicated, as are all of us on this program, in fact, today, and many, many others like us. So I don't want to leave the impression that nothing can be done. A lot has been done. More needs to be done. And hopefully, if in 5, 10 years from now other polls are taken, the results will be more encouraging. But right now, they're pretty bleak and occurring at a time when anti-Semitism itself has become resurgent on a global scale. The problem is compounded. So that's kind of where I am.
Thank you, Alvin. Омер Бартов, maybe you want to say some words. So let's just go in the order of speakers. Thank you.
Sure. So of course I agree with Alvin. I would add something else that I think is important for us to think about. And I didn't really get a chance to talk with Paul about it, so I can't say what he would think, but my sense is that he would agree. We live right now in a world that is full, if you speak with young people, that is full with uncertainties and dangers and a sense of doom that has to do both with politics, with the environment, and young people particularly are really filled with dread. And much of it translates also into violence, both popular violence, communal violence, regime violence, and growing erosion of democracy. And I think that in our in studying the Holocaust and in commemorating the Holocaust, it is very important for us to think about it also through the prism of the present. As you know, Benedetto Croce said, all history is contemporary history. And it reminds me of one event of which about 2 years ago, I was talking about my book on Buchach in a community college in Brooklyn. And I was speaking about the fact that how easy it is that this crust of civilization that we depend on, that we trust, the rule of law, law enforcement, that we are protected by, how easily it can break. And then everything is possible. And I was saying, you know, as an example, you think that one day you, late at night, you hear something happening outside, maybe a burglary, and you call the police, and the police come and they arrest you. And at that point, you understand that everything is working fine. There's a rule of law, there's a police that comes when you call, but now you are on the target list. This, of course, happened to many Jews in the Holocaust, precisely this kind of flip. And my student, the audience, the students, the young students who were there, who were mostly minority, sort of looked at me and said, of course we know. I mean, this happens to us all the time. And I think this is an important lesson for us to understand, and to, if we want to bring an understanding of the Holocaust to the present, we have to talk both about the erosion of democracy that we are seeing right now, and about the growing tendency to identify certain populations, whether they are in our midst or whether they are on our borders, as outsiders, as dangerous, as insidious, as not entirely human, as not part of the solidarity of humanity. That is what we see in Europe, that is what we see in the United States, and we see that in many other places. And if we can talk about that, we can reach people who otherwise think about the Holocaust as something that happened a long time ago in a far place by people they don't know, to other people that they're not interested in. To me, that is very important. And in my classes, I speak with students about that. And my own sense is that this brings them closer, rather than talk about the uniqueness of the event, its centrality only to Jewish history. I think this is what people like Jeanne Marie, what Primo Levi record already spoke about shortly after the Holocaust. It was not only that event itself, it was not only the targeting of the Jews, it was the targeting of humanity. And so, of the solidarity of humanity. This is what Hannah Arendt talked about. And I think we always have to remember that if we want to preserve the memory of that event. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Irina Radchenko, maybe you want to also have a few words on that, on your thoughts.
Thank you. I guess that maybe really in our society, in which we faced with some problems of violence, of terrorism. And for Ukraine, it's actually the problems of the war in eastern part of Ukraine, war with our northern neighbor, with the Russia. So for us, it's maybe, of course, it's like the presence of the age of the Holocaust studies in the for further representation of this tragedy. So for us, it's a very actual issue to not promote it, but maybe to speak about this in more detailed. Some courses, some, of course, webinars of all forms, with the all forms communication with the people, with the public, of course, with the old generation, yes, with the pupils, etc. But of course, it's very important, and I believe that it will be actual in some in further decades of our. So it's my opinion.
Thank you. And before we get to the to Stefan Brухfельд for some last reflections, there were two questions in the audience I can answer quickly. One was whether any Turkish Jews lost their lives during the Holocaust. I just give a recommendation, a book recommendation here by Corey Goodstead. She wrote a book called Turkey, the Jews and the Holocaust, that was originally written in German but translated in English and also, I believe, in Turkish. And then there was another question that maybe you want to talk a little bit about, or also give some advice, Stefan. There was a question: how was the book promoted to get these big numbers of requests? So thank you, Stefan.
Right. In Sweden in '98, the big number, I mean, they couldn't have been predicted, but the scene was set for the possibility of big numbers, of course. And first, there was a letter from the Prime Minister to 700,000 Swedish families, informing them about the existence of the book and that they could receive it for free if they requested it. And then there were request forms or order forms at post offices, at citizens' offices, and so on. And there was also quite a lot of information in the media about the book and its publication. And there was a big, huge public event on the 27th of January '98 when the book, when Göran Persson, the Prime Minister, held the first copy of the book in his hands. This was the reason why we were in such a hurry, because he had to have a book by the 27th of January '98. So that's the reason. But of course, it couldn't have been predicted, but this sort of setting was there. And then my thoughts. Well, first, I'd like to say something about what I would think Paul would say. I think Paul would be pretty optimistic about the future in terms of Holocaust education, etc. Not that we don't live in complicated times, but considering how much is there now structurally, which wasn't there 20 years ago. Internationally also, there is a big difference. And this work goes on. And for Paul also, he took a lot of, there's this book by Tony Judt, I just forget the name now, but about Europe after 1945, where Tony Judt argues, even though it wasn't official, but the importance of the Holocaust as a historical fact for the construction of European cooperation, etc. after the war. And this is a book that Paul included in his teaching. But I think he would be fairly optimistic. My own view is that I've learned that you shouldn't ask historians about the future. They're notoriously, or we are notoriously bad about predicting the future. But I think we can say, and this is part of my own work, in that when I began my now very long work on Holocaust denial in Sweden, and the roots of Holocaust denial, I could see the development in certain quarters that sided with, came to side with Nazi Germany, how they gradually entered, as it were, the rabbit hole and never left it. And these were educated people. These were parts of the Swedish elite who had problems with parliamentary democracy, etc. But during the 1930s and 1940s came to side 100% with Nazi Germany. And they never left that position. And of course, Holocaust denial and denial of any German crimes during the war came very naturally to them. So, and I think we live in times which are not, I never thought that I in my lifetime would see similar processes in real time, but we actually do in the past years. We live in dangerous times, or to quote or paraphrase an apocryphal Chinese curse, interesting times, and that we actually see people moving from what once was sort of democratic positions to less democratic positions, even though even people who earlier were supposedly pro-democrats. And I think this is a lesson actually from history. We can see this process in the 20s and 30s, and that scares me, because this is the, or could be seen as early stages of something worse to come. Hopefully not, but we don't know. So to summarize, this insight is really, I can only quote a line from Simon and Garfunkel's wonderful song, The Boxer from 1969, where there's this line, still a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. And this is the times we're living in.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stefan. And thanks all of you. Unfortunately, we have to come now to an end. We're almost half an hour running over time. And thank you very much for your patience. I apologize that we ran over time so much, but I think it was necessary to give a little bit of more time for each of the speakers, and also some reflections. So thank you all, the speakers, and also the listeners. If you have further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the email addresses that you find after the webinar. And I hope I can see you all live and in person another time, or on another Zoom meeting around the world. Thank you so much for being with us and participating in this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.